Hi, everybody. Hello. How's everybody doing? We're in the prime after lunch spot, so thank you very much for still being here and paying attention. I'm going to introduce it even before I sit down, our panel. Um, we are here to talk about male allyship, so specifically how we can get more men involved in gender equity and diversity in the workplace. I think it's pretty simple math, and I hate to oversimplify a problem, but when more men are in leadership positions, we need more men to actually take action to change that scope overall. So we're going to talk about how we can get more men involved. My name is Brooke Shepard. I'll be the moderator, and the reason I'm moderating this is because I was invited. So thank you, Artemis. And I mean that in more ways than one, too. I really actually was invited into this movement and into this role overall. So I work for a company called Weber Shandwick. We are a global public relations and marketing firm. And a few years ago, we were working with the UN Foundation for Women on the He for She campaign. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, spearheaded by Emma Watson. It really was one of the first big actions of saying, we need more men involved. And I was asked to develop some ideas for this campaign. And in the research, I realized, oh, they're talking about me. These kind of men involved, men like me who have always been active supporters of an equitable workplace. I feel very lucky to work in a place where 70% women. I've had great women bosses and mentors. I always said, yes, I'm a fervent supporter, and I do actually nothing. So taking that cue, I started going to more events and really had to be invited to those too. I would check in with my coworkers. Is it okay if I go to this event? It looks like it's just for women, but I think they're talking about gender equity, and I think I'm meant to be involved. She'd say yes, and then I would go, and then I'd be applauded for being there and being one of the few men that are there, and I would say, well, where's the other guys? And so now we are finally here at this moment where we really are in a spot to be inviting more men. I think that the moment is right for it. I applaud the men that are in the room today. Let's bring more men. We have a saying for that, right, Lydia? Bam. Bring a man. Works really well. Just keep that in your back pocket. So we're going to get into the discussion. I want to introduce my panel members. I'm going to start down at the end, Lydia Lee. So Lydia is Vice President of Content Strategy at PayScale, the leading data compensation and software firm. They're based here in Seattle and are beyond a startup. I've been to their offices. It's much bigger than a startup at this point. And Lydia and I are co-partners in arms, I guess. I'm really excited to name her as one of my allies. We recently co-hosted an event inviting men more into the discussion on equal pay day. It was called Use Your Power Hour. It was a cocktail hour event because we thought beer would get more guys to show up, and they did. It worked, so we're onto something, and hopefully it's the first of many. Next to Lydia is Lionel Lee. Lionel is the, I'm going to have to refer to my notes, sorry, Lionel. It's up on the, oh. Hey, look at that. Head of Diversity and Engagement at Zillow Group. What I'm really excited to actually talk about with Lionel is his background outside of Zillow Group as well, though, working with a lot of community organizations. The Chicken Soup Brigade here in Seattle that actually became the Lifelong AIDS Alliance. And also your work with supporting people in substance abuse recovery. And he founded a school for Taekwondo that's had 54 junior Olympians. And if we ask him nicely, we'll get him to talk about sparring with his wife and how it made their relationship stronger.
Thank gosh he's not here.
And last but not least, Anna Auerbach is co-founder and co-CEO with Work, which is a consulting organization dedicated to flexible workspaces. They actually produced a great report on flexibility and is going to be a featured speaker this afternoon at 3:10, I believe, too. So we'll cue a little bit of your discussion from that as well, too. Anna was also named one of the entrepreneurs to watch out for by Inc. magazine recently. I'm not sure what they said to watch out for. It was, I really should just to watch. I think that would be more appropriate, but it was slightly alarming.
To watch out for.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to take a seat. So one of the things, there is a lot of talk and I think great discussion. We'd love to get to action. One of the things, as we've gone down this journey and starting talking to more men about how they can be involved, one of the things they always ask is, okay, I want to be engaged, but what can I do? And so what I'd like to have as part of this discussion, I asked this audience sort of keep us on task, is coming up with an action list. What is it that we can recommend to those men so they say, yep, I'm all on board. What can I do? We have something in hand so we can get them to action as well. So with that, I'd love to start with a little bit of that, the awareness that men have a role overall. And, you know, Lionel, when we were talking about this, maybe I can start with you. You really talked about, you know, first of it is recognizing that privilege that you have. And can you expand a little bit on that of how we can get more men engaged and even overcoming that first notion of that awareness that they need to start?
Yeah, sure. We were talking about the privilege that men have in the workplace in general. Even the language kind of speaks to it. One of the things that you'll hear, or some of the things that you'll hear, is that men need to create space, or men need to give space, or men need to allow space. And basically, what that's saying is that we're in a superior place, right? So we take that, we internalize that, although we don't know that we're internalizing that. And then we feel that we're in a position of power. I think that language has to change.
Anything you would like to add to that?
I mean, I think in terms of one thing I like to talk about too, I think when Brooke and I actually did this event recently around allyship, it started with this male allyship conversation and it expanded beyond that because I also, you know, I've recognized over time many people in the workplace have privilege, have access, have power that they can wield for good or not. And that, you know, recognizing the access and the power that you might have to impact somebody else is powerful, you know, and I think we all have power to use. So, you know, that's one of the things I've tried to challenge myself to think about is like, how can I think about the things that I can actively do to make the path easier for someone not like me. And I think for men too, you know, it is getting to that recognition that the meritocracy is a myth, you know, that if things were equitable and we truly did have workplaces based on a meritocracy, then the data would bear that out. And we don't see the data bearing that out. With the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions, in kind of the best paying kind of jobs in the workforce, we see that that's not the case. That's not what's happening. And so just acknowledging, recognizing that we're not where we want to be, and if we want to get there, it does take action.
And I think a lot about just the idea of the social capital concept. And I think that's something that's been sort of a new term I've been using where men at work have a lot more social capital. And in terms of the universe that I tend to live a lot in, which is the world of flexible work, men just have a lot more sort of social capital and allowances to do the things that they do. And there's a huge opportunity to lead the charge for others because for them, for a lot of times there's less bias around the actions that men take. Whereas if a woman took an equivalent action, there'd be a lot more bias. I think we think a lot about even the tone of speech, speaking up, like women who speak up are loud, annoying, bossy. Men are, you know, they're assertive, they're strong, you know, they're leaders, right? Even if we think about little girls and little boys, like bossy versus leader. And so I think a lot about how men can sort of use the social capital that they have for good. And in terms of like the universe I occupy with flexibility, one of the things we talk about is that men can really be champions for flexibility where, you know, when a man sort of takes advantage of flexibility, it's like, oh my God, he's amazing, right? And when a woman does it, it's like, oh, there she goes again. Like, she's just not serious, you know? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to set the example and to sort of reinvent what some of these things mean. And not to take it to too broad of a social level, but there was like a really great and sad opinion piece in the New York Times a little while ago about like, what's wrong with our little boys after a lot of the violence that's been happening, and talked about the fact that we have like a universal, men only have like one type of man they can be, and we don't have room for like other types of men. Like they can only be macho and like strong, and that's it. But the more men can be champions for different types of leadership, different types of work structures, different types of norms, the more it sort of gives permission. And it's unfortunate that we need to put it in the perspective of giving permission. It sort of gives an allowance for others to do the same.
You think, I mean, that idea of social capital I find really interesting. Do you think that men who engage in this in their workplaces are actually gaining social capital as well? Because it is a forward thinking idea, and to be standing up for others actually shows, hey, I recognize I have leadership opportunities here. Do you see that reflected in the people you work with, or any of the common traits of CEOs who are really taking action?
Yeah, I think so. The honest answer is it depends, and not to, as a cop out, but I think in a lot of organizations, when a man, for example, with flexibility, just staying on that topic for a moment, leaves early for a child's appointment or a soccer game, they're really looked up to. That being said, some of the research that we've done and the data that we've put out shows that men actually have a higher flexibility gap because there still is a lot of social stigma against doing those things. So the answer is it depends. It depends, I think, on the social culture construct at each company. But the only other thing I'd add is there's been a lot of research into leadership, and I find it all really fascinating. And they found that some of the qualities that we all look up to as leaders, like some of them tend to be more feminine traits, like empathy, understanding. And so it's just interesting. I think we need to kind of reframe some of the conversations to be more flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. Lydia, I'm curious, from your perspective, if you've seen the other side, the benefits of a equitable workplace as well too, and how men can actually benefit from that also.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Anna's point, when we create organizations that are thinking about workers as whole people who have lives outside of the workplace, then we do think about how we work, and how we allow for some back and forth. Like, I think there's been a lot of interesting dialogue recently talking about workplace, kind of work-life balance being a myth, and it's not about balance. It's kind of, you can't separate these two things completely, and kind of allowing for the fact that throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, you're going to have things, family responsibilities, home responsibilities, work responsibilities that you're going to have to take care of, and having workplaces that allow you to do that in the way that makes sense for your life and doesn't force you into one path. I was even having a conversation with someone here earlier talking about there's, social constructs, just workplace constructs. I think we all have put in place where the concepts of FaceTime, for example, used to be much more important. And I even catch myself, having somebody on my team take a lot of work from home days. I catch myself going, oh, that's, another one. And then I'm like, wait, it doesn't matter. Like, if this person is putting out the outcomes that I need to see and doing their job, like, what does it matter if they're here in the office or they're not? And so I think, organizations that embrace kind of more of those concepts that we consider kind of policies that support women really are policies that support human beings.
All right, so I heard two actions in there. Everybody keep me honest on this, but one is supporting flexible workplaces in your actions as well. So being active and taking advantage of them. And also, I think a very unique one, not relying on FaceTime or putting emphasis on things that are going to get in the way of those policies. I hadn't heard the FaceTime one before, but that's very true. It's phone time. Phone time works too. Could be email time. We all like
Time,
that. Let's talk a little bit about with the barriers, though, of getting more men involved and some of the things that we have to overcome with them. So, Lionel, I'm going to go back to you on this one, and maybe the probably toughest part to start. But that was, you told me, well, I admit I've made a few mistakes.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the
Please tell us about your mistakes.
My mistakes. We don't have that much time. Now I'm looking at but one of the things that happens oftentimes is that people are so afraid of stepping on landmines, and we will step in landmines. That's just going to happen, right? We live in a society that we were taught certain things that we are now finding out that are not true. Hopefully, if we're enlightened enough, we're finding out that are not true. And then you expect us to be perfect, or we expect to be perfect, and we're so terrified of being reprimanded or being chastised or being looked at a different way for making these mistakes. But I think the mistakes are the way that you learn, right? For example, I work in diversity and engagement, and I'm supposed to be somewhat of an expert in this area, which I'm not. I'm definitely not. I made a statement the other day in the office about women and how they speak to each other, because I have the privilege of working with some of the most powerful women I know. And one of the women that I work with, her name is Monique Franklin. Believe me, you will hear of her. She is just brilliant, one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with. And I made a comment to her about I would love to see her sit down with another great friend of mine, Tamara Walker, and just so that I can just watch them verbally spar. And I said that, verbally spar. And she just looked at me and gave me this glare, and I was like, "Uh-oh, what did I do?" And I had no idea, but it was an opportunity for me to learn. She and I had a sit down, and we talked about it, and I found out through her that there's a history of the way that men have perceived women who are strong and intelligent, and then they put women against each other. I didn't know that. I know it now. I know it now, so now I can move forward and make sure that I don't make that mistake again. But I guarantee that I'm going to make another mistake. Guaranteed. And I think there's so many of us now, especially in the Me Too movement, that are so afraid of making mistakes that we don't want to take that step. And in order for us to progress, in order for us to get better, we have to be brave enough to take that step.
And two things to add to the idea of mistakes. I think, particularly with like the Me Too movement and some of the sensitivity, it's interesting. I was thinking back to the job I had before I went to the entrepreneur life. I had an amazing manager. I adored him. He like took me under his wing. And I remember we traveled a lot for work. I was in consulting, so traveled all the time. And every time we were on the road, like I was like, "Do you want to grab some dinner?" And he'd always be like, "No." And I finally approached him in the airport, like on one of our flights back, and I was like, "Can I just like ask why?" Is there something weird going on? Did I do something to offend you? Is there a reason you won't have dinner with me? Which sounds like a very weird thing to say to your boss. And he was like, listen, he's like, and I don't mean to make this sound weird. I feel uncomfortable. Like I feel uncomfortable taking like a woman out to dinner that is not my wife. I was like, well, you're not taking me out to dinner. Like we are both eating on the company dime, but so it's different. But, I think it took me raising that for him to be comfortable with it. And he actually became the mentor that sort of championed me being promoted. But I think sort of like the mistakes happen on all sides, and sort of the onus is on everyone to sort of raise those and to speak to them. And the flip side I'll add is I recently was asked to speak on a panel. It was a women's event. It was all women attending, all women on the panel. And there was a debate that went around the or the panel organizers and the speakers around whether men could be invited. And because a man had like tried to sign up and like on the Eventbrite, they're like, that's a man's name, like you shouldn't be invited. And it wasn't Brooke, that you would have passed. So I spoke up and I was like, I don't see why not. If a man wants to register, like, well, they're like, we want to create a safe space. And I think the challenge is like, that's also a mistake. Like I completely understand the feeling of wanting a safe space sometimes. That being said, we should not be exclusionary. If men want to be a part of a conversation about women in leadership, the last thing we should do is shut the door in their face. And so I think it's really important to sort of raise your hand in a lot of those moments. And that's been one of the lessons to me, where I think if I had not spoken up to my boss and said, like, why won't you have dinner with me? Like, I don't think we would have had the amazing, sort of mentorship relationship that we had. And the flip side is with this panel, I think that would have been a really missed opportunity. And there was only like 5 men that showed up, but they all came up after and were like, this was such a great conversation. And I think like we shouldn't shut the door in people's faces when we're trying to create opportunities.
Lydia, that came up for us when we were playing the event. I wonder if you would want to reflect on that conversation, because it really was, how do we make this so it isn't the men are here to solve this?
Yeah. And our event in particular, we were trying to invite men because it was about allyship. But we also said, if we have a room full of men talking about how to show up for women and no women, like that's not a great, conversation or entry point into this, journey. And I do think, hearing you speak, and I think what comes up for me is, in some ways, like with this movement, like I think we need to move beyond safety. Like it's time. We have talked a lot about how important it is to get women into positions of power, into leadership, to make sure that the workplace is equitable, that pay is equitable. That we've talked it to death, right, amongst women. And it's no longer the time for safety in terms of sharing kind of experiences. I think you have to start reaching out and opening the door and talking to people that haven't typically been in that conversation to say, hey, I don't know if this is something that's registering for you, and this is what we've been talking about for a long time, and can we talk about it together? Because I do think there has to be a dialogue. There has to be conversation that happens so that we do learn from each other. And I think also a lot of people have to be careful not to be waiting to jump on somebody, waiting to judge, right? When you invite men into this conversation around gender equity, or when you're thinking about equity more broadly, not just gender, right? There's going to be missteps. People are going to say the wrong thing. They're going to ask a dumb question, whatever it is. And we have to be ready to um, give each other the benefit of the doubt and to say, how do we grow together? How do we learn together? I'm not waiting for you to say the wrong thing.
Yeah. All right, more action items. Admit there will be mistakes. Get out of the safe zone. Be not afraid to talk to people and invite them into the conversation. One of the other things that we've talked about is, there's so much what not to do. And I think that idea of being ready to jump on people. Can you think of instances where you've seen something positive and encouraged it, or helped people continue their own journey on that as well? I'm okay with silence.
I can think of
too.
a couple things.
I know it's
I could think of a couple things. Just like any other corporation, we have a lot of meetings, obviously. And we were in a meeting, and one of our male leaders, we were going through this conversation, and I noticed him keep looking over at one of the women that were in the room, and she was younger, and she was a little bit more junior. And he kept looking over at her, and I was wondering, okay, what is he looking over at her for? And then I saw him lean over to her and say something, but I didn't know what he had said. So afterwards, I said to him, I asked, what was that about? And he said, well, she had a really great idea, and she just would not speak up. And I was trying really hard to get her to speak up. And eventually she did. But it was just that through that encouragement, that constant encouragement, that she was able to get the courage to actually speak her mind. And then you got a chance to see who she was, and she was brilliant. But I do think that it might have taken her a little bit longer. And through that little display of allyship, it just kind of sped up the process for her. So yeah, I would say that I saw that.
Yeah, one thing I'd say too is so recently at PayScale, we started a task force to look at diversity and inclusion and pull together a set of people kind of from across the organization, keeping kind of diversity in mind with who we were bringing into the room to have these conversations. And one of the first things that happened when I was pitching this idea of creating this group was I had to kind of get sign off from the executive team. And so I pitched this idea of hey, I think we need kind of a group of employees talking to us about what we need to be doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. The best ideas aren't necessarily going to come from this one small group. And how do we kind of open up the conversation? And when I was trying to kind of sell this idea, it's there's a lot of well-meaning people in every organization, but they have different ideas about the right path, right, to get to kind of the good outcome. And so not everybody was completely on board with this idea. And one of our C-level execs, who is a white man in the organization, really spoke up on behalf of this idea and kind of pushed it through and managed to kind of get other people on board. And he called out to me, he said, I feel like when I started talking about it, they were listening in a way that they weren't listening to you. And that must feel really discouraging, because that wasn't fair. You said everything that I said. And I was yeah, and that happens. But I was and he was trying to figure out ways how to extract himself out of this situation. I don't want to be speaking on your behalf. And I was I get it. And we'll get there over time, but it's actually super beneficial to me to have you speak on my behalf and on behalf of this initiative, on behalf of this group. You have their ear in a way that I don't. You're a C-level executive, I'm not, and there's a trust there that I haven't built, and so I could use you. I need you, in this instance. And And I think it was a little bit of a light bulb moment for him to be like, oh, like he thought he was just trying to help me in that meeting, and he ended up actually being kind of um, a exec sponsor, C-level exec sponsor of this group, where he really was pushing the agenda forward at the C-level in our organization.
And I think that's exactly the kind of allyship that we want to see, right? And it's about behavior that changes attitudes. So we actually need more people in leadership positions that create those environments and support each other. All right, we have 1 minute and 40 seconds left. We're going to do a lightning round. One action item that you would recommend to men of how they can get more involved. So when those men ask, oh, I would love to be involved, I don't know what to do, what is the answer, Anna?
I have a horse in this race on flexibility, clearly. So for me, it's set the example, set the tone, and just leave when you need to leave loudly, talk about it, talk about your kids, talk about your life, be a human being. And I think that helps set the tone and sort of give permission for everybody to live their life the way they want to live their life.
I would say reach out, learn as much as you can, be open to conversations, be open to admitting that you're wrong, be open to admitting your place of privilege.
And someone earlier mentioned the practice of amplification that the women in the Obama administration undertook. And I've mentioned that a lot over time, but I also think men need to keep in mind that they can participate. Like, you can amplify the women around you. You can make sure that they're in the room in the first place. And so that was that particular example. It was women kind of supporting and amplifying women in the Obama administration, but I think we can broaden that. Like, men also can kind of amplify the women that they work with.
Absolutely. All right. Well, panelists, thank you very much. Audience, thank you very much. Very attentive for after lunch. Appreciate it.